And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
One item we missed last week in our potpourri of exciting things going on across the state, country, and around the world was the fact that the Democrats have announced that they are going to Chicago, Illinois next year for their national convention, while Republicans head up the road to Milwaukee. But it's interesting that the Democrats picked Chicago, Illinois, which is perhaps example one of the really bad job Democrats have done around the country running big cities. I mean, look at the endemic problems that are there in the Windy City. And now they have a mayor-elect who's worse than the incumbent mayor who was thrown out by the Democrat electorate in their primary election. I mean, the city has gone from crazy to crazier. And it's reminiscent of 1968 when the Democrats, last had their convention in Chicago. That year, of course, was at the height of the Vietnam War and all of the student protests against the war. And in the streets of Chicago, Mayor Richard Daley, his honor, sent out troops to, shall we say, quell the riot. The next night, Abraham Ribicoff, the liberal Democrat senator from Connecticut, stood on the floor of the convention and denounced the quote-unquote stormtroopers that had been unleashed by Richard Daley. And Richard Daley, of course, in his famous expletive-ridden screams at Abraham Ribicoff up on the rostrum while he sat with the Illinois delegation are legendary. I think you're going to see a whole lot more of craziness, not only inside the convention hall, but surrounding it come next summer when the Democrats meet there. And in a footnote to all of that, this week, Robert F. Kennedy, the scion of the famed Kennedy family, announces he will run in the Democrat primaries against Joe Biden. The last time a Kennedy took on an incumbent president was in 1980 when Ted Kennedy, his uncle, challenged Jimmy Carter. Carter won the primary, but we all know how that general election turned out. We're hoping we'll see a sequel of that next year. And we are now hearing, as we tape this, that Joe Biden will announce his candidacy on Tuesday, finally getting to it. But when we say that, a little bit of historic perspective. 8 years ago, Donald Trump hadn't even come down the elevator at Trump Tower yet. We're still very, very early in the process. The media is already focused on the 2024 elections, but there are a lot being held this year, particularly in my home state of Pennsylvania, that have significant implications. So vote in the 2023 primaries and general before we get to 2024. And a federal judge takes up the suit by the Manhattan District Attorney, the overreaching DA there, Alvin Bragg, in his quest to quash the subpoena issued to one of his former assistants, Mark Pomerantz, by Jim Jordan's House Judiciary Committee. And the judge said, yes, there is a reason why the House has some oversight over this matter, because there were, in fact, federal funds used by Bragg to prosecute Donald J. Trump. This Pomerantz character is a real study of interest. He apparently was working in the DA's office unpaid. Think about that. That really has chilling implications, that a guy is there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to quote-unquote get Donald Trump in a political prosecution. When it doesn't happen on his watch and in his timetable, he leaves, writes a telltale book, and the rest just unravels so quickly that we now see the presentment and indictment against Donald Trump. I'm still believing that a judge somewhere along the line is going to say enough of this and throw that case out. But we'll have to stay tuned. And in Washington, D.C., yet another appearance by Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who may be the biggest disgrace to serve in the cabinet of any president in my lifetime. I can't think of any that has been worse. This guy is so incredibly arrogant. He doesn't want to answer any questions. He stonewalls and just sits there with a smug little grin on his face when he's asked questions, and then wants to go through all of these polemics about what a wonderful job he's doing on the southern border. But of course, this week he couldn't remember or couldn't tell the American people how many children, unaccompanied, have come across the border and are waltzing into our country now. It's like 350,000 on his watch, and he's unconcerned about that. He doesn't seem to have any sense of what's going on with the drug trafficking coming across our border, the fentanyl poisoning that's killing Americans all over the place. And he sits there with that little blank-eating grin on his face and simply refuses to answer questions. He should be impeached. He won't resign. I think the House is actually going to try to do something about removing him from office, because in a cabinet full of real disgraces, he still comes out as number one on that list. And the debt ceiling once again becomes a headline issue, and it is amazing to think about the fact that Joe Biden 10 times while he was in the U.S. Senate voted against extending the debt ceiling. And now he tells us, the cataclysmic events that will occur if we don't do that. Ditto with Chuck Schumer, by the way. And no, we don't want to default on our debt, and ultimately there's going to be an extension. But Kevin McCarthy is taking a good and strong position on this. Hopefully he can hold his caucus to saying that we'll freeze spending at the 2020-11. That, by the way, folks, is not a cut in spending. I mean, the Democrats continue to say that if you don't increase spending, you've cut it. That's not even a mathematical word game. That's not even voodoo economics. That's just plain nonsense. And so, once again, we have an opportunity to really look at federal spending and why it just continues to run out of control, and where we can't even claw back the unspent COVID money. Think about that. Unspent at this point. Money that was issued as an emergency stopgap a couple of years ago. It's time to get some sanity back to our federal spending and some fiscal restraint that really means that the American people will be asked to give up less and less of their hard-earned dollars and allowed to keep more and more of their own money and make for themselves the decisions as to how that money is best spent. When that happens, we're all going to be better off for it. Everybody's budget will be better. And finally, I may have put the jinx on the Tampa Bay Rays last week, talking about the fact that they were undefeated and were going for a record 14 straight wins to begin a season. And of course, that stopped at 13-1 immediately after we talked about it last Saturday. But they're still off to a pretty good start. And on one sad note, we lost former Pennsylvania Congressman E.G. Bud Shuster, the man who was always the champion of transportation funding and highway development. May he rest in peace. For now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.